Welcome, everyone, to the final session of the 2022 Sutherland Congressional Series. I'm Rick Larson with Sutherland Institute, and we're pleased to be joined by a live audience and an audience online. As you all probably know by now, if you've seen one or more of these, the purpose of these gatherings is an opportunity for you to hear from those you elect. They choose the topic, and we give them the opportunity to speak completely on a topic that's important to them. Before we begin, we really want to thank our longtime event sponsor, Zions Bank, and we thank the Larry H. Miller Companies for hosting us in a really beautiful location that I wish all of you online could see. We welcome today Senator Mitt Romney, who's served Utah since 2019. We recognize that August is a very busy month, so we appreciate you and your staff for making time to be with us today. The topic that's been chosen by Senator Romney is confronting our 21st century challenges.
That's the first one.
And the first one is the microphone that I'm holding in my hand. It's going to be a long conversation, isn't it? The format is the senator will offer some prepared comments, and then, as is customary, he and I will sit down and have a little bit of a Q&A and get below the surface a little bit. So again, thanks to all of you, and thanks to Senator Romney.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you to the Larry H. Miller Group and Zion Bank for hosting this event today. Appreciate the chance to speak with you briefly and take the questions that you may have and that Rick may have. I was asked the other day at an event where I was speaking, what was the most rewarding professional experience I'd had? Because my background was in business, and I left business and became involved in public life as I came out here for the Olympics, and I've served as a governor and run for national office and now serve as a senator. So what was the most rewarding of those experiences? And the answer came quickly, and that was the chance to be the person that helped organize the Olympic Winter Games of 2002. And I say that not because it was the most famous of the events or the most financial rewarding or it made me a household name or anything like that. I say that because we had a large group of people, almost 2,000 people in the organization, and all of us knew that we would all lose our job at the same time. As soon as the games were over, we were all fired. I mean, think about that. We had 3 floors in the Wells Fargo building, all these people working together, all of us with lots going on. And yet we recognized that we were all unemployed as of February of 2002. And that created an unusual dynamic. No one was looking to get promoted over someone else, because what difference does it make? We're all going. No one was trying to get ahead of someone else, and there were no politics in the organization. Instead, everybody recognized that in order for them to have the best positive track record for their resume, the games had to be successful. So we were entirely focused on one thing. Everybody, how do we make these games fabulous and successful? And if someone else wasn't doing a really good job, we didn't point at them and say, oh, you're not going to get promoted. No. People said, how can I help you? What can I do to help? It was a fantastic experience. It's entirely different than working in the Senate, right? All right. Because there, everybody has different agendas. And of the 100 senators, probably 95 or so really think they ought to be president and are laying track to actually become president. All these different ideas about who gets ahead. And so it's a very different environment. And if you want to get something done, you have to look at the setting that you're in, the culture of the organization that you're in, to say, okay, how do I succeed in this environment? The Olympics was a very different setting, all working together. The Senate is a different setting. And I've been involved in different types of enterprises where how you get something done is going to depend in part on the nature of the organization and how its culture is oriented. It didn't take me long to figure out that if I wanted to get something done in the United States Senate, that I had to find Democrats and Republicans that I could work with. Because there's a rule in the Senate that most people don't know, and that is for something to pass, unless it's a taxing bill or a spending bill, but for a major piece of legislation to pass, it takes 60 votes. And there are only 50 Republicans. So that means you got to get 10 Democrats to go with you. So that means for anything to pass, it has to be a bill that's attractive to both Republicans and Democrats. Now, this concentrates the mind for people that want to get something done. And I wanted to get something done. You might ask, why did you go to Washington? Why did you decide to run for Senate? My career was in business. And it didn't make a lot of sense in terms of career progression standpoint to go to the Senate. But there were two things that led me to decide to run for Senate. One was I felt that Washington needed more stable, sober people to deal with what could be a crisis of some kind. And felt that we needed to have more people. And I thought of myself in that category. We need some serious, mature people in the event there's a crisis. And number two, I wanted to actually get laws passed that would help our state, but also help our nation. So I wanted to get stuff done. For me, this was not about performing so I could get a great job on Fox as a commentator. It was not about becoming famous, because I subscribe to the old Jimmy Durante song. Most of you don't know that name, but he used to have a song where he said, "Fame, if you win it, comes and goes in a minute." My dad was a governor and served in the cabinet. After he left Washington, he said, "Washington, D.C. is the fastest place to go from who's who to who's that." All right. So, it was not for fame. It was not for wealth. I wanted to actually get stuff done. And that means not just introducing bills or saying, "Hey, I filed this on the floor to do that." No, it was about actually getting things passed and becoming law. And for that to happen, it meant I had to work with people on both sides of the aisle. Now, I was a little fortunate that I got invited to a dinner by Lisa Murkowski of about 8 people, half Republicans, half Democrats. And we were in the middle of negotiations this was during the height of COVID, over a COVID relief bill of some kind. And the White House wanted to spend $500 billion and Nancy Pelosi wanted $2.2 trillion. And at that dinner, we all said, what would happen if we came up with a bill that was $900 billion? And how would we fashion it? What would we structure it like? And we put that together. And ultimately, that's what became the bill. And this group of 8 or so has continued to work together over the last couple of years. And so the infrastructure bill that was passed was fashioned and negotiated by this group. Right now, there's another bill you may have heard called the Electoral Count Act reform. Again, this group came together. A few more were added to it to negotiate that bill. And let me just tell you some of the things that have come from this process that first relate to Utah and then relate to the nation at large. Because I recognize that my job is to represent the people of Utah, to do a better job for our state, but also to think about what's right for the country as a whole. So with regards to Utah, for instance, we got water problems, right? We have drought going on. And so I recognize part of my job is to find a way to address this. The Great Salt Lake is shrinking. So I got together with a couple of others, including Congressman Curtis, and said, why don't we put together a bill that puts the Army Corps of Engineers in the mix in understanding what's happening to the Great Salt Lake and helping us understand what actions we've got to take to save the Great Salt Lake. And so we got that passed, and the money associated with that effort is now passed. And by the way, it was collaborated, with Brad Wilson at the in the House here in Utah, and that work is going on together. Another water project. We had a battle going on between ourselves and the Navajo Nation as to who had how much rights to the Colorado River. And Senator Hatch long ago began working on a piece of legislation that would negotiate a deal with the Navajo Nation saying, you give us these rights and we'll make sure you get $200 million to get running water to the Navajo residents of Utah that don't have running water. Senator Hatch organized this long ago. But just languished. I came in, and because of this little group that was working on together, and because I was one of the negotiators of the infrastructure bill, I got that put in the infrastructure bill, and it passed. And we now have those rights secure and the funding available to put running water into the homes of Navajo citizens of our state. There's other funding that's important for our state. We got $3 billion for highways for Utah. As the fastest growing state in the nation, we need highways more than a lot of other states do, new highways. And by the way, that $3 billion is on top of the normal federal funding, highway funding that we get every year. This is a one-time, probably once every 50 years type of thing. We also got funding for transit money for Utah. We got money for broadband in rural Utah. All these things were part of the negotiation on this infrastructure bill. And because I was one of the 8 that worked on this, I was able to put that in. I should tell you a kind of a funny story in this regard, which was the Central Utah Water Project was one of the things I got put into that bill. And Chris Barkley, who's my legislative director back here, he and his team made sure that was in the bill. We came together on Sunday night. The bill was finally printed up. How many thousand pages, Chris? At least 1,000 pages. And Sunday night, they called the Senate in to come vote on this bill. I should say Sunday morning, they called us in to vote on the bill. So everyone's there getting ready to vote. And Chris and his team, reading through the bill, note that the Central Utah Water Project was not in the final draft, that someone had taken it out, that it wasn't there. And my Democrat friends came to me and said, look, we'll fix it. We'll fix it later. We'll have an amendment and fix it later. We'll get you the money later. And John Tester, Democrat of Montana, said, nope, that's not fair to Mitt. He's going to get blamed. They're going to call this, some kind of a special deal for him. And he's getting it. That'll never fly. We've got to stop and fix it now. And so for the rest of Sunday, they worked on getting that put back in the right language, reprinting the bill so we could introduce it that night and finally vote on it. So there are advantages to being part of a group that is getting things done. Now, there are other things. I mean, we got funding, as you know, to make sure that the ground-based strategic defense that's being championed out of Hill Air Force Base, we got the funding for that. Some of you don't even know what Dugway is. Dugway, Utah is a place where we do research that provides defense against chemical and biological weaponry. It's here in Utah. It's the place for our military. We need funding for that. We got funding for that. These are the kinds of things that I'm proud to be part of that actually got done. And I hope you measure me by what I get done. But now there's some national priorities. And the national priorities are pretty heavy lift. And the ones that related to Utah, like infrastructure, obviously are national, and COVID was national. But then there's some others that I'm really concerned about. The 4 biggest issues that I see of a national nature that I'm working on but aren't finished yet. We made progress, but we got more to go, are these. Number 1 is the emergence of China as the great power on the planet. That's what they would like to be. That's not acceptable to us. But as they become a stronger and stronger nation, they're going to have a larger economy than ours, just given the number of people they have. They therefore will be able to afford a larger military than ours, again, given the larger economy they'll have. And they expect to be the geopolitical, economic, and military leader of the world. That would change the world. They have a very comprehensive strategy to accomplishing that. What's our strategy to deal with China? Hit or miss. No strategy. We had a strategy to deal with the old Soviet Union that was developed by George Kennan and back to the days of Harry Truman. And we followed that. Different Republican, Democrat presidents followed it pretty similarly. Ronald Reagan took it a little further than some, and ultimately we succeeded. We have no strategy to deal with China. And so Senator Menendez of New Jersey and I drafted a bill, which is now a law, calling on the Secretary of State and administration to develop a China strategy, not just with government officials, but with people outside government being part of this commission. And that commission will be established hopefully before the end of this year. And we'll begin to finally talk about what we ought to do on a comprehensive basis, not to battle China, but to get them to be diverted from a course of confrontation. That's one issue. Second issue, the amount of debt we have. We spend about $1 trillion more every year than we take in. We have about 31 trillion of debt as a nation. The interest on that debt is in the hundreds of billions a year. Bill Clinton called me a number of years ago and said, when interest rates go up again, we'll be spending more on interest than we do on defense. How can you be a nation that leads the world if you're being beggared by paying interest more than national defense? And that's where we're headed. So we're going to have to deal with this. And you might think, okay, that means you got to, vote against every program and save every nickel and dime. And that's part of it, I'm sure. But do you know what we vote on is only 1/3 of what we spend? Let me explain that. The Senate and the House vote on spending. Every year we vote on a budget, but we only vote on 1/3 of what's spent. 2/3 is spent automatically with no vote. 2/3 is for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest. 2/3 we don't even vote on. And by the way, that 2/3 is growing much faster than the economy. The 1/3 we vote on is not growing faster than the economy. The 1/3, we keep that in pretty good check. But the 2/3, that's a place where all the money is being spent. So we have put together a piece of legislation, which is now supported by a group of Democrats and Republicans, called the Trust Act, which says, look, we've got to form a rescue committee for each one of these big spending pots: Social Security, Medicare, the Highway Trust Fund. Each one of these areas, we have to have a committee that's going to look at it, come up with a solution to get it finally balanced, economically balanced long-term. And once we come up with a solution, take it to the floor of each house and vote it up or down. So that's a piece of legislation I very much want to get passed. Fortunately, there's some good Democrats who agree on this, everyone from Joe Manchin, Kyrsten Sinema, to Mark Warner, and a number of Republicans. We'll get basically, I think, almost all Republicans to sign up. So that's the second area. Third area is family. Families in this country are struggling. Our population is declining. Were it not for immigration, why we'd have the same kind of problem that China and Russia are facing, collapsing population. But we ask people, why aren't you having kids? They say, well, we'd like to have more kids, but we can't afford it. And we have the strangest series of bureaucratic programs to help families that people don't know about and don't take advantage of. We have a child tax credit. In order to get the child tax credit, it's $2,000 per child. You're going to have someone calculate your taxes for you, and then you got to apply for it, and you get the money as a tax credit. So what we've decided to do is we're going to take that money, close that program down, and give the money to people on a monthly basis. So a pregnant mom gets $700 a month. Once she's 4 months pregnant, she begins to get in her 5th month, $700 a month. So to be able to provide for a child coming along. And then when the child is born, $350 a month until they turn 6, at which point it turns to $250 a month. Okay, so that's taking the money we're already spending and getting it to people at a time when they can use it to help raise their kids. We want people to be able to feel they can afford to have a child at the time they're making a decision as to whether or not, for instance, to carry out their pregnancy or just a decision to get pregnant in the first place. Those are 3. And the 4th is the climate. We got real climate issues. I happen to feel that that's the one area we're making the least progress on. All right. Now, I know that my Democrat friends are jumping up and down about all the great new bill for climate. Here's the problem with most of what we do on climate. It's designed to get us a little better here in the U.S. on our emissions. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm all in favor of reducing emissions from the U.S., except that it doesn't make a hill of beans worth of difference for the world. Because if we were, for instance, to get rid of all the cars in America, CO2 emissions keep going up. All right, they keep going up because we're not the biggest emitter in the world. China is. And in the future, all the growth is coming from China, Brazil, Indonesia, India, the developing countries. The only way we're going to reduce global emissions is if we and others find technologies that are low emitting and low cost, and therefore are willingly adopted, not just by us, but by everybody. And that we're not doing. Now, there are a number of folks that the head of ExxonMobil, his view is you're going to have to put a price on carbon. I think he's right. But the Democrats didn't do it. They just had a chance to do something like that. They all talk about it, but they didn't do it. So instead, it's the little stuff at the edges that makes you feel good. It's straightening deck chairs on the Titanic, not doing what you absolutely need to do if you really want to solve a problem. So for me, those are the 4 big ones, besides our Utah priorities, that I'm working on. Number 1, dealing with China. Number 2, dealing with the amount of debt we have. Number 3, helping families in this country. And number 4, dealing with the global environment. So, by the way, I like the job. It's fun. I have good friends that on both sides of the aisle that we get together and work together. I appreciate the work being done here. Organizations like this that are tapping into tough problems and coming up with solutions are where we get many of our good ideas in Washington. And I salute this work that's being done here at Sutherland, and I appreciate the willingness of each of you to provide those opportunities for us to speak, but just as important, to listen. So with that, come on back.
Do a quick tech check. Can you all hear us okay if we don't use this faulty microphone? And everything is on for our online audience, folks? We're good? Okay.
Oh, they fell asleep long ago.
We've lost them. They're watching cat videos. So I want to touch on every topic you brought up,
Okay,
hopefully not in a repetitive manner. But let's start with Utah and then build out.
okay.
I was doing a quick scan of the bills that you're working on right now, and it's a lengthy list. You're doing a lot of work. I hope most Utahns recognize that. But some jump out. I look at the Bonneville Shoreline Trail Advancement Act, the Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission Act, the Great Salt Lake Recovery Act. There's a theme here.
Yeah.
Before I get into one of the specifics, I want to ask you a general question. Do you feel like Congress as a body is attuned to the problems in the Western United States? You're a Western senator. Do they get it?
The answer is not completely by any means. Fortunately, a number of staff members from congressmen and senators in eastern states came to Utah this week to go drive around southern Utah and get a sense of just how much land there is, and to understand that it's not all flowers and trees and little ponies, jumping from spot to spot. But in
The
some
ponies
cases,
are nice.
yeah, but it's like, it depends on how much you've been drinking. But it's in many places, just sand and sagebrush and very little grass. And it's like, this is, people need to understand that when they talk about the federal government controlling almost 70% of our land in this state, that maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense, and maybe people here who live here have a better sense of what's right for our land, and particularly our forests, for instance. I mean, how do you reduce wildfires? So yeah, do they fully get it? No, but are they learning? I hope so.
I would think the Colorado River may be catching their attention with both water and energy tied to that.
Yeah, I think the Colorado is now becoming a national issue. I must admit, I can't figure out how it is. I just read an article that said that now the federal government is stepping in and imposing huge cuts on state use of the Colorado River. So Arizona is going to get huge cuts. Nevada is going to get huge cuts. One more state. Oh, it's not a state. Was it New Mexico, or the country of Mexico is going to get big cuts? But California, no cuts at all. Now, guess who uses by far the most, more than the other 3 combined, is California. Now, part of this relates to the fact that there were negotiations long ago, and they're following those negotiations. But look, we've got a shortage of water coming from the Colorado, and we need everyone to participate in the reality of the drought that we're facing.
It's interesting to hear that you toured the Great Salt Lake. For those Utahns born and raised here, is an area of great concern. It's something that couldn't have been imagined, frankly, years ago. And it's tied to so many things. It's tied to our climate, to snowfall, to tourism, to I believe the legislation you're working on right now calls for deeper study and investment in solutions.
Yeah.
If it's fair to ask at an early stage, when you're calling for study, do you have any sense for what solutions will look like?
The answer is no. And the answer is that we're opening up the funnel as wide as it can be to say, what are the kinds of things we can do? Everybody knows we can all conserve more. But there are some who believe that if we conserve at the full limit of our conservation capability, it's still not enough. And if we don't have a change in climate that provides more rain, conservation alone probably won't do it. We got to do more. And the question is, what would that more look like? Well, one thing you can do is you can make sure that secondary water and even refuse water is reprocessed, recycled, and used again and again and again. California is doing that in a big way. That's expensive, but that's something we can do. Are there opportunities for pipelines that could bring in additional water in even to the Colorado or to the Great Salt Lake? What would the cost of that be? But I'm convinced that if we continue to have drought like we have now, we may not, but if we do, we're going to have to look pretty broadly, and it will be expensive. And that's one of the reasons that we put, I think, about $45 billion into the infrastructure bill for water projects, is to deal with circumstances just like this, so that we will be able to help finance what may be necessary to provide for our economies and our lives.
Talk to us a little bit about a local dimension to a national problem. So you look at the Great Salt Lake, you look at the Colorado River. What is the proper role of state and federal government when you're addressing issues that seem local but affect everyone?
Well, and that's always a great debate as to how much should be done at the state level, how much should be done at the federal level. So, for instance, if there's a hurricane in Florida, the question is, who should pay for the recovery, for fixing the roads, for repairing buildings, for helping people with their homes? Who's going to pay for FEMA? Should it be paid for just by the people in Florida, or should it be paid for by the entire country? And what we've done in these kinds of natural disasters in the past is had some kind of sharing agreement where the states pay what we think is appropriate and they can afford, and the federal government picks up a portion of the cost as well. In dealing with the kinds of issues we're talking about, the Great Salt Lake, for instance, if it turns out the conservation alone can solve the problem, why, there's no need for the federal government to help with a check. But if it turns out we got to have a pipeline and we've got to have pumps and power stations or desalinization in the Pacific Ocean to get water to California so that they don't need to take water out of the Colorado. I mean, there are all sorts of possibilities like that. Well, then my guess is it will be not just a state affair, but it'll be partially paid for by federal dollars, and that comes down to who has the votes. And the Western, hopefully the Western senators and Western representatives will stick together.
So as we're describing a problem 20 plus years in the making, and to be honest, inattention to a lot of details of water use and conservation, Utah finds itself in a really interesting position of explosive growth, infrastructure demands, housing. People are moving in. They love the quality of life. They love the state, which is all good. But I'm interested in your perspective, both as a senator and as a businessman. Are we taking this seriously enough? Is the average person saying, all right, I'll water my lawn one less time this week? Do people feel that's fixing it? Are we serious enough about what's happening?
No, I don't think we are serious enough. I think it's very hard for us as human beings to anticipate a shift in such a dramatic way as saying we're running out of water. I was with the head of a water district in a major part of our state that said he went to the cities and towns in his region and said, we're out of water in 2 years. We will have no water in 2 years. And that concentrated a lot of thinking on the part of the mayors in that region. And they came up with the conservation plan, which is the most severe and aggressive in the entire state, maybe in the nation. That has to happen, in my opinion. The drying of the consequence of the drying of the Great Salt Lake is so significant that it's now become a national issue and priority, as well it should. But we need to think about it here more than we do. It's not something that we all solve on an individual basis. It's something we're going to have a collective understanding as to how much change is going to occur in our own conservation habits, and also what types of adjustments we're going to make in pricing. I mean, I met with the head of one water district who said, look, we believe that what we need to do in our community is say, for the first X thousand gallons that you use in a month, you pay a very modest price. But if you use above that level, you pay a much higher price, so that people, have enough water at a reasonable price for, watering the bushes and taking, care of their culinary needs. But if they want to have, all sorts of property or fill their pool and so forth, they're going to pay a lot of money. And that would perhaps change some of our conservation habits. That makes sense. Taking out some of the grass in our median strips in our yard. I've said to my wife, we got a big lawn that gets a lot of water. I mean, is it time, to put an AstroTurf? I mean, these are, by the way, if you start charging me enough money for me watering my lawn, that's what I'm going to do. And we're going to have to get serious. We live in a desert. We live in the second driest state in the country, but we don't act like it in some cases, and we're going to have to take on that reality.
Would you agree that water is a really compelling, specific example of the risk of politicizing everything? You think there's solutions we could get to if we could take the politics out of the debate?
I don't know that there's a Republican versus Democrat posture on water yet. The capacity of the two parties to politicize something has been taken to new heights in the last couple of years. So I maybe we can find a way to politicize it. But at some point, when you haven't got water, it's like, oh, well, it's no longer political, it's real. And there are things we can do and should do that I think are bipartisan. And in dealing, for instance, with the water issues, and the funding that we put in the infrastructure bill for water projects, it was done on a bipartisan basis. It was not like a Republican point of view and a Democrat point of view. It's like, hey, we need to do more recycling. We need to do more desalinization. We need to do more pipelines. We need to have more dams to collect, if you will, monsoon rain, so it doesn't run off. We need to collect it. These are the kinds of things we agreed to. And I think most of what happens in Washington, interestingly, actually is bipartisan. It doesn't get headlines because confrontation and conflict gets headlines, but collaboration typically doesn't.
So this may be a segue because of the name of the bill, but I want to get your views on the Inflation Reduction Act, which question one, does it address inflation? Question two, there's a lot of climate related content in that particular piece of legislation. Opine for us.
Yeah, well, I have to tip my hat to my Democrat friends for coming up with that name. What a smart thing to do, which is it doesn't reduce inflation. It probably is slightly inflationary because the spending occurs in the first couple of years. And so more spending is by definition inflationary. So it will probably add slightly to the inflation problem that we have. It will not end it. Now, the higher taxes go on over 10 years. And so they're saying, well, over 10 years, it will depress some spending because of the additional taxing. But I can assure you, if there's any additional revenue that comes from taxes, Congress will find a way to grab it and spend it. So, I don't think it's by any means an Inflation Reduction Act. I do believe inflation eventually will come down somewhat. I think the Federal Reserve is using a very blunt tool to do that, but the only tool they really have, which is raising interest rates and trying to slow down the economy. They want to slow it down enough that they don't create a painful recession. But we'll see whether they're successful in doing that or not. But there are parts of the bill that they made it a bill that not one Republican, I mean, not one on the left or the middle or the right of the Republican Party could vote for. So it was voted for entirely by Democrats. They're going to hire 87,000 new IRS auditors. You might think, well, how many auditors are there now? Less than that. All right. The total employment of the IRS is less than 87,000. So they're going to more than double the IRS. Get ready to be audited. Small businesses, individuals. That's one that I'm not wild about. Two, you might like the idea that the government is going to be able to finally negotiate prices for drugs at Medicare. But the negotiation works this way. The government tells the drug company what the price is. If the company doesn't agree, the government can put a 95% tax on the revenue of the company. All right. So it's it's not exactly a negotiation. All right. I joke that that's like my negotiations with my wife. You basically have to give in from the very, very outset. And the impact on our society is potentially significant. So think about, you're a pharmaceutical company thinking about investing $1 billion to develop a new drug. Now you don't know what the price is going to be of the drug if it works. How do you make a decision to invest billions of dollars if you don't know what the price will be? And so you're going to have, as a result, a pullback on the part of our pharmaceutical industry on developing new products. So that's a concern. There are more things I don't like, the tax provisions that are associated with with the bill. And one of my pet peeves is, I mean, I like electric cars. We all like electric cars. We all wish we had one right now with gasoline as expensive as it is. But the idea of the government writing people a check for $7,500 to buy an electric car doesn't make sense to me, particularly when you can't even buy one because they're out of stock. They can't get the batteries. They can't build them, but we're going to pay people money if they'll buy them. This makes no sense. Maybe it made sense early on to get people to start, creating a new industry, but we don't need to be doing that now and spending billions of dollars in writing. I think it's 60 or 70 billion in writing checks to people to buy electric cars. In my opinion, makes no sense.
Should we jump global?
Sure.
In a campaign not so long ago, you made a rather prescient statement about Russia. And China has been part of what you've been trying to inform the nation on for quite a while. The world has changed. Things are different. I want to talk to you a little bit about, and you mentioned in your comments, with China's ambitions and so forth, and the natural growth that's occurring. I want to talk to you both about both security, national security, military security, and economic security. Certainly, we should be learning some lessons about supply chain that have to do with COVID and China.
Mm-hmm.
As a business leader, what are the solutions to supply chain? Is there a fear that this is going to right itself to the point where we'll go back to the status quo and, oh, we're okay, we can outsource everything? Just looking at the dependence on Russia and Ukraine for grain, and looking at manufacturing out of Asia, what are you thinking when you look at future supply chain decisions?
I think you will continue to see global corporations purchase product from around the world. Global trade is not going to disappear. But I do think that when it comes to products that are vital to national security, national defense, that you're going to see governments, including our own, look at their supply chain to make sure that they're buying from friendly countries. And so if we're, as we are right now, we're looking at the smart bombs we have and the missiles that we have, they need computer chips to be guided. Those computer chips are virtually all manufactured in Taiwan. And recognizing that, the Senate passed a bill that provides funding to build a semiconductor or a series of semiconductor facilities here in the U.S. It's going to cost about $50 billion to do that. But it's a national priority because it's a security priority, and it wouldn't be necessary if China were not breathing down the neck of the people in Taiwan. And the supply of those computer chips were not 100% secure. So, yeah, I think you'll see a rethinking of supply. I think you'll see it for also just in corporate settings, even non-security. I think some corporations are going to say, where am I going to get a particular product? So for instance, I was visiting a company yesterday that makes insulators for electric utilities, for their power lines and their insulators. And this is a company here in Utah. It competes with a company in South Carolina. The South Carolina company gets all of its products from China. I think the Utah-based company is going to have an advantage. One, the China-based company is having a harder time getting things brought over. Two, it's much more expensive to get them brought over. And I think utilities are going to say, as long as I'm going to be buying these things, I'm willing to pay an extra 5 or 10% and get it from a place that's a reliable supplier. So I think there's going to be a natural inclination, unless there's a very substantial price gap, to try and purchase more locally. But nonetheless, you're going to see, we're going to continue to have grain that's going to be shipped from around the world, and we're going to have a lot of products that are going to come from China and other places. That's fine. But I think we're going to rethink, particularly as it relates to national security priorities.
Actually attended a national security summit recently, and an ambassador from Taiwan was addressing the group via Zoom, and the tensions are high. Mm. Does the situation between Russia and Ukraine, are there parallels to be drawn with China and Taiwan? Does what's going on there make tensions between China and Taiwan more dangerous? They completely separate? And is the U.S. responding in the right way? If we look at how we've assisted Ukraine, is that sufficient to deter China?
Yeah, Taiwan is an economic powerhouse and a technology powerhouse. I mean, they really are, on the globe, they're a jewel. And China has long had ambition to capture Taiwan and to make it part of one China. And that ambition continues to grow. Xi Jinping has indicated that will be accomplished by 2026. That Taiwan will be part of China by 2026, and his military spokespeople have said military action would not be ruled out. So that's a real challenge for the world, and he would be basically taking a play out of the Vladimir Putin Ukraine playbook, which is there's a smaller nation or a smaller population nearby. Taiwan has a population of roughly 23 million people. How is it going to be able to defend itself fully against a nation of 1.4 billion people that spends an enormous amount of national defense? By the way, China spends a lot more on national defense than is reported. Not surprisingly, they don't report everything fully, but when you look at it on a comparable basis, they're spending and having almost as much armament purchased as we do. So what should we be doing? Well, one, we should be making Taiwan as porcupine-like as possible, meaning make them look like a very difficult entity to attack. And I won't get into classified information, but there are types of weaponry that are more effective in deterring invasion than others, and making sure you get them as much of that as you can without creating an excuse for China to jump in. So there's that balance. That's number one. Number two, you want to work with our friends in the region and globally to say in advance, by the way, if China invades Taiwan, and then by the way, all of your semiconductors are now vulnerable into products that rely on semiconductors, which is almost everything in the high-tech world. If China does that, let's agree in advance as to what actions, what sanctions we're going to take, cutting off purchases from China, putting tariffs on Chinese goods, and so forth. So let them know how big the economic consequence would be. So I'm one of those that says it's good for us to flex American muscle, but it's better for us to use our friendships and with our allies around the world to flex the muscles of all of the free economies in the world. Because that, I think, is that, for instance, is what is hurting Russia as much as the strength of the Ukraine military response, which is the response of the world economically. So I'd like to see that happening. And the administration is making both of those efforts. I'm not critical of them in that regard. Senator Menendez has a piece of legislation to provide additional funding for weapons going to Taiwan, and encouraging the administration to move faster on that front. And I think you will see an effort of that nature succeed.
It's important to know. Thank you for pointing that out. Geopolitics is something we could spend all day on, and we're eventually going to get into the unanswerable questions because there's so many dynamics at play. So in the interest of time, I'm going to shift to, I want to talk about institutions. Mm-hmm. It's been a while. I talked to you, was trying to remember the exact date about the Family Security Act. Mm-hmm. I think Ross was on that call. It was a very interesting conversation. There's now a Family Security Act 2.0.
Right.
Tell us about 2.0. What did you learn from 1.0?
Well, 1.0 took the money from the child tax credit, the $2,000 per child, and turned it into a monthly check to help people. And that was the heart of the original version. But we provided that for people whether or not they had earned any money. So whether they were working or not, they got the check to help with raising their child. And we had a couple of people, I probably shouldn't mention their name, that said, I'm concerned that you're going to have some people that just figure they can live off of having babies. They're not going to work, and they're not inclined to work, and they're just going to get a check, and that's going to be their lifestyle. And so he said, well, let's do this instead then. Let's say that a couple has to earn at least $10,000 in the prior year to be eligible to get those checks for themselves and their children. And $10,000 is a hurdle for some folks, but by the way, it's an incentive to get married, because it's $10,000 whether it's a single person or a married couple. So you got a better shot of getting $10,000 or more if you're married. And so we want to encourage people to get married and to recognize you got to earn something. You got to have a part-time job. You got to be working minimum wage, but earn $10,000. Once you get that, you get the full amount. You get the full $700 a month for a pregnant mom, $350 for a child under 6, and $250 per month for a child over 6 years or 6 and older. Believe that that's the right approach to take. What's happened since we put that in place is we've gotten kudos and more support from people on the left and the right. And there are even some that are pointing out that with the abortion issue very much now in state hands, largely, that helping young women make a decision about whether or not to have a child would be beneficial if they knew that they were going to be getting a check if they became pregnant, and would have a check if they had a child.
So it's interesting, government incents a lot of things, and yet there's a sensitivity if anybody can claim social engineering within a bill. But we've engineered home ownership and drug abuse prevention and education and all kinds of things through very clear incentives.
Well, and we social engineer in a negative way. So the social engineering of government support programs right now encourages people not to get married. You will lose benefits. You'll lose Medicaid, housing vouchers, child tax credit, all these things. You'll lose them if you get married, because your income gets combined with your spouse. You now reach a higher income level. The benefits are reduced. The highest tax rate, the highest marginal tax rate in America is for a person who gets married and then loses their benefits by virtue of having their income combined with their spouse. So we are social engineering in a big way against marriage. Funny thing, marriage is going down, right? So we're just saying, no, get rid of that. Get rid of the penalty for marriage, and instead just say, look, if your household has $10,000 in income, you get the benefit. And that clearly removes that penalty.
So some of my favorite analysis of marriage and family comes from atheist economists, because there's no agenda.
Yeah.
There are outcomes, there are benefits. Talk a little bit about why do you encourage marriage and family?
Well, a society is going to have a hard time surviving if it disappears. The number of people in that society are disappearing. Look at what's happening in China. I mean, I talk about how China is on track to become the global superpower and so forth, but recognize they have some real problems that could completely throw that in the air. Their population is going down. That one-child policy, that's caused them to have a declining population. Russia, one of the reasons Russia's doing what they're doing, in my opinion, invading their neighbor, is their population is going down, and their industrial base is not particularly strong. So they want more population, more industrial base, so they're going to take over a neighbor, another one. So for us as a society, we want people who want to have a child, would like to have a child if they could afford one, know that they will be able to get some support in having that child. We're not going to give you a big bonus to go out and have children. We're not doing that. But we're going to say we will help you if you want to have a child. We will help, not by giving you some tax benefit that takes an agent from H&R Block to figure out for you, but instead the Social Security Administration is going to send you this on a monthly basis. You can count on it for raising a child. And I just think that, and by the way, we're not going to change the demographics of America. We're not going to suddenly have a huge increase in population for checks of $350 per child. But we will continue to have most of our growth come from immigration. Fortunately, that's going to be a big source. But we want people who want to have a child know that they will be able to afford a child.
Let's talk about families as an institution. I've got in front of me a Gallup poll where they did a survey on 16 institutions across the American landscape.
Are any of them doing better?
No.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Um, the one that tanked into single digits is Congress. Do they deserve that?
Yes. What was it John McCain used to say? He said our approval rating is like 5%, which is, and if you took out relatives, blood relatives, it'd be zero.
It'd be zero.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an interesting thing. So if you look across the institutions, the two that held even, that stayed above 50%, actually stayed in the 60% range, are small business, not corporations, small business and the military. And we could examine the similarities between those, why people might view those with a little more respect and confidence. Congress troubles me because we're talking about a single digit confidence rate in an elected body. Where is the disconnect that people continue to vote and re-elect officials in a body that their confidence decreases almost by the month? Do people understand their own role in this institution?
Rick, I don't have an answer to that. I see exactly what you see, which is people think Congress is terrible, and yet they vote for the same congressperson and the same senator in record numbers. And the only thing I can think is they think my representative is great, my senator is terrific, but it's all those other ones that are either in the Democrat Party, the Republican Party. Those are the ones I don't like. And so I think that's part of the perception. I don't know that's going to change anytime soon. My biggest concern is the one you raised, which is the decline in trust in institutions generally, schools, churches, charitable organizations, the FBI, police, our election officials. All these institutions are being attacked by wily politicians, knowing that by attacking, they get more eyeballs, they get more support, they get people who are inclined to feel the worst. They get more support, so they attack these things. I don't know how a democracy is able to thrive, even a representative democracy as ours is, if people don't have trust in institutions. And I note that we've seen ballots get harvested in other countries, and we said, oh, they've got democracy now. Voting is only one part of a democracy. If they don't have institutions, labor unions, schools, churches, and so forth, that people have confidence in, after they've voted a couple of times, it goes away. It disappears. You've got to have strong institutions. And the attack on the institutions in our country is a very dangerous trend. It's very compelling for politicians. It's the tool of a demagogue, but it's very dangerous to the preservation of our democracy. And those of us who believe that the Constitution is not just brilliant but inspired, have to ask ourselves, as we attack institutions and instill in our children a skepticism about our institutions, are we in effect attacking our basic Constitution itself and the nature of the government, which allows us to be what we are, the hope of freedom around the world?
For the sake of this next question, when we talk about institutions, I'm basically using the definition of constructs that establish normal behavior, expected behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Gallup does not list the family as an institution. Sutherland is committed to the notion, and we're not the only ones, that the family is the first and most essential institution in society.
Yeah.
Tie that to your Family Act. Talk about how families are not too small to be a tool in turning this tide against institutions.
Well, family is where most of the next generation will learn the values that propel our country's future. It's moms and dads, grandparents that shape the perceptions of the coming generation, and I hope that's being done well by your respective families. I was invited to a birthday party. J. Willard Marriott Jr., the 90-year-old founder, or excuse me, chief executive officer of Marriott International, just had his 90th birthday. I got invited to the birthday party. So I went to Arizona, where they had the party at their hotel, the Camelback Inn there. And it was a wonderful celebration, and all his kids and grandkids and great grandkids and so forth were there. And I talked to one of his daughters-in-law, and And she said, tomorrow we have a legacy meeting. I said, what's that? And she said, well, Uncle Bill, or they call him Bill Marriott, not Jay Willard, is hosting an all day long discussion of what our family legacy is. And I thought, well, isn't that an interesting thought? So this summer, we gather my family together for 1 week, and there's some 39 of us now. And so we had, for our Sunday school lesson for 3 Sundays in a row, we had legacy. What is the Romney family legacy? And we talked about faith and our legacy of faith. We talked about family, our commitment to family, and we talked about kindness, and then spoke about how our nation figures into all of those. So homes are where these values are taught or not taught. And if they're not taught, and if people are learning values from politicians, heaven help us. And if they're learning from the internet, it's even worse. And so I'm hopeful that the legislation we proposed will encourage people to actually get married, as opposed to and stopping the discouragement of marriage that exists now in the law, encourage more marriage, and give people the resources to help in the nurturing of their children.
This series is interesting because we're without fail are talking about weighty matters. You look too far down the road on some of these, and it's easy to become discouraged. We prefer not to end on that note. So I'd like to ask you, with so much of politics today is about grievance. It's about offense. It's just a contemptuous mix of accusations, far more focused on the past than the future. Can you give the audience some hopeful message, some perspective you have regarding our future that causes you to be hopeful?
I was asked that question just a couple of hours ago, and I'm going to respond in the same way, which is freedom is an extraordinarily powerful elixir. We face smart people in other countries that have different approaches and government approaches to managing what people can watch on TV and what they can hear and what they can read, how their businesses work. And it all sounds very compelling, but freedom wins out time and time again. And this country is the bastion of freedom. We love freedom. Sometimes people say we got too much of it going on, but I'd be much more concerned if we had too little of it going on. We love freedom. We celebrate freedom. It allows us to be entrepreneurial, to be inventive, to listen to people who have different points of view and combat with one another orally on these different points of view. It has led us to be who we are as a people. And we have not strayed from our conviction about the power of freedom. And I hope we will continue to do so. If we do, we'll win. Excuse me.
So you just delivered the walk-off home run on the Congressional Series. And it sounds like just in time.
Just in time.
There's some water down there. So with that, let's end on a positive note. I want to thank everyone, both here in the room and online, for joining us for this event and for the series in general. This is the final event, but please go to sutherlandinstitute.org. You can see each event again. You can see excerpts. You can see some analysis of content, and I'd encourage you to do that and take this opportunity to listen to those you elect and find out what's important to them. So with that, we'll conclude, and thank you again.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.